Hi everyone, my name is Scott Shaler. I'm a PhD student at Indiana Tech and will be presenting key points from my paper, An Effort to Analyze Corruption in Brazil. In today's presentation, I will begin by giving a brief introduction, followed by key points from the literature and the relevance that this topic has to global leadership. I will then provide the methodology that I followed, including the hypotheses and dataset used. As a result from the analysis performed, I will share the quantitative results followed by the conclusions of the study. To begin, I like the quote from Cardenas. Corruption is a widespread evil at the global level, and Latin America is not exempt from it. Even with the years of research and anti-corruption programs, corruption continues to affect the world negatively, especially in Brazil. Brazil has been plagued with corruption for many years and continues to be in the news. What is alarming is that in recent years, corruption has been estimated to have eaten up between 1.35% and 5% of Brazil's gross domestic product. These economic costs have been very significant, but the effects of corruption have indicated a steady decline in trust in political actors. As a result, my study is based on the research question, do people who perceive corruption to be prevalent also view human rights threatened? Next, I would like to provide some background on my study. First, corruption has been defined by many authors, but I believe Ossipian's definition encapsulated it the best. A form of behavior that occurs when the misuse of public power results in exceedingly expected costs. Corruption is a troubling constant in the Brazilian political system, with instances of corrupt behavior readily apparent at the federal, state, and municipal levels, and across all branches of government. Second, I found great importance in how the principal agent theory and collective action theory both help further understand and explain corruption. The principal agent theory builds on the rational choice assumption that an agent will only decide to engage in corruption if the expected net benefits outweigh the net. Collective action problems, on the other hand, arises in a group setting when a strategy that is individually rational produces an outcome that is collectively inferior. As a result, individuals may benefit personally by defecting and engaging in corruption. Third, the relevance of this study regarding global leadership lies within cultural dimensions. Understanding cultural dimensions that may influence the level of corruption is critical for a country's competitiveness. Salim and Bontes' study between culture and corruption resulted in acceptance of one of their hypotheses. It suggested that higher gender egalitarianism values are associated with corruption. Now that you have some background of the study, I would like to next describe the methodology used, including the hypotheses and data set. First, my null hypothesis states there is no statistically significant relationship between the perceptions of corruption and the respect for individual human rights. Second, my research hypothesis states that there is a statistically significant relationship between the perceptions of corruption and the respect for individual human rights. My study used data from the World Values Survey. I filtered it by country, specifically Brazil. This resulted in a total of 1,762 respondents. From the survey, I chose to use question 112, which I referred to as my perceptions of corruption variable, and question 253, which I referred to as the perceptions of human rights variable. Now that you have a little background of the data and variables I used for my study, I would like to present my analysis. First, I would like to present the univariate analysis, specifically frequency and central tendency and dispersion measures. As you can see on the screen, most respondents perceive Brazil to be corrupt, while the respect for human rights chart data appeared to be more distributed. Due to the ordinal nature of the variables, the appropriate central tendency to investigate is the median. The median represents the midpoint in a set of values such that 50% of the cases in a distribution fall below the median and 50% fall above it. In this study, as you can see on the screen, the median for the perceptions of corruption and respect for individual human rights are 10 and 3 respectively. Regarding dispersion, I chose to investigate the standard deviation, which represents the average amount of variability in a set of scores. The standard deviation of the perceptions of corruption variable is 1.574, while the standard deviation for individual human rights is 0.816. So as a result, I can infer that there is a larger variance in the perception of corruption variable. Next, I would like to present the bivariate analysis, specifically cross-tabulation, chi-square, gamma, and normality. But first, let's review the case processing summary. As you can see that over 90% of the cases were valid, while only 8% were excluded. This is important because since only 8% were excluded, I'm confident that the amount of included data is appropriate for my study. Now let's look at the cross-tabulation results. These results essentially provide insight into any patterns between the variables. Before I ran this cross-tabulation analysis, I recoded the perceptions of corruption variable to simplify the analysis. I recoded to 3 categories: low, medium, and high. Values 1 through 4 became low, values 5 through 8 became medium, and values 9 through 10 became high. As a result of this analysis, you can see that 40.1% of respondents replied as not having much respect and perceived significant corruption in the country. Also, you can see that over 89% of respondents have a high perception that there is corruption in the country, regardless of respect of human rights. This signals a potential pattern with these variables. After examining for any patterns, I wanted to see if there was any association between the 2 variables. So I included a chi-square test as part of the cross-tabulation analysis. Looking at the results of the chi-square test on the screen, you can see that the p-value is 0.634. This is much greater than the standard alpha value of 0.05, ultimately indicating to me that the association between the variables is insignificant. I wanted to confirm this with an alternative test for ordinal variables, so I chose to run a gamma test. Gamma ranges from -1 to 1. Where a 0 reflects no association, while a gamma of 1 reflects a positive perfect relationship between variables. On the other hand, a gamma of a -1 reflects a negative perfect relationship. Looking at the results of the gamma test of my variables, you can see that the gamma value is 0.037. This indicates a very weak, almost negligible association between the perception of corruption and the perception of respect of human rights. The gamma test confirmed that there is not an association between the variables. Prior to testing the variables for significance, I went ahead and analyzed the variables for outliers and normality. So first, outliers represent scores in a distribution that are noticeably much more extreme than most scores. From the screen, you can see that no outliers were detected. To determine normality, I referred to the KS test statistics. This is the opposite of the Shapiro-Wilk statistics that you see on the screen. I use this test specifically because the sample size is greater than or equal to 50 respondents. Looking at the significance column represented by SIG, you can see that the values were either less than 0.001 or 0.000 for each group. This indicates that the data does not follow a normal distribution on the population. Even though normality was violated, for the purpose of the study, I proceeded with an ANOVA. Now it's time for the test of significance. Before I share the results of the ANOVA, I want to share the results of the Levene test. I ran the Levene test to assess the variables for equality of variances. Looking at the results on the screen, the Levene statistic based on the mean is 3.28 with a p-value of 0.02, which is less than the standard alpha value of 0.05. This indicates that the variances are significantly different and are unlikely to have occurred based on random sampling. Even though the variables didn't appear to have an association between them, I needed to determine if there was significance using the ANOVA test. Looking at the ANOVA results on the screen, you can see that the p-value is 0.368. This ultimately indicates that there is not a statistically significant difference between the means of the corruption perception variable. As an alternative significance test, we can refer to the gamma results I presented earlier. The gamma value was 0.037, confirming a negligible association. From the analysis of the variables, I came to a couple of conclusions. First, there's obvious concerns that not only does corruption plague Brazil, but human rights are not respected either. Lastly, even though there appeared to be an association between the variables, the relationship was ultimately insignificant. I leave you with some important references that I used for this presentation and within my study. I want to thank you for watching my presentation. If you have any questions about my study, please email me using my email address that you see on the screen. Thank you again and have a great day.